Now, you may have all been aware that I shared a video recently, not too long ago, about a shadow figure in this house. Let me tell you that I thought things had calmed down and there was a massive gap where not many things happen. However, I want to share with you today, in the most realist sense, stuff that's been happening here with an update. I'm not really sure what to make of it all, but I gotta admit it's got me a little spooked recently. Now, a lot of this stuff has kind of been dormant for years, and I don't know if anything's happened to kind of shift that energy up, kind of like unsettle the dust as such, but I've not purposely done anything, and I don't really dabble with that kind of stuff. After that video was recorded and shown to you with the shadow going phew, phew, my partner saw somebody on the stairs. My partner went to the bathroom, which is the room next to this room. On their return, they came out the bathroom, and just in front of them is the hallway, like the bit you walk on, the landing. We call it the landing here in the UK. I don't know about in the US. At the end of this kind of walkway, you turn to your left and there's the top of the stairs. And if you go down the stairs, you're kind of going back on yourself, but just down, okay? So they come out the bathroom. She saw this figure and saw coming up the stairs. And yeah, she was freaked. Come into the bedroom, shut the door. And she's kind of stood there, like frozen, looking at me like eyes wide open. And I'm like, what's wrong? And just stayed there, silent, kind of just listening. And I'm like, I'm listening too at this point, like, what are we listening for? She said, I saw something on the stairs. It was coming up the stairs. Now, bearing in mind nobody else was in the house. At that point, we were both a little kind of spooked in that moment, like time stood still. I opened the door. I stuck my head out into the hallway. I had a look. There was nobody on the stairs. Walked down to the bedroom, the other bedroom. Nobody in there. Looked down the stairs briefly. I didn't want to go downstairs at this point, but yeah, couldn't hear anything. I was like, okay. Came back into the bedroom, talked about it, and just kind of let it be. But some other weird things have been happening too, with lights going on and off in this room, little things like that. Now, what makes this interesting, okay, is how it appeared. The reason it's interesting is because a family member who was in this house, at the time, my bedroom wasn't this room, it was the other room. They saw a black shadow figure leaving my room, just walking along the landing back this way. Now, when I found out about that, I literally did like crap myself in that moment because it completely freaked me out. Now, this gets a little deeper, so bear with me, okay? I hadn't seen that shadow figure for myself in this house. However, going back to when I was 16, 17, we're kind of looking at about 1996. At that time, there was a comet in the sky called Hale-Bopp, and it was visible in the sky for about 2 weeks, and it was amazing, right? Because you don't get to see a comet very often, and it was fantastic. So I was hanging outside with my friends. I say friends, it was one friend who's no longer with us, God bless him, and my younger sister. It was getting on for nearly early hours in the morning, but at that point my parents felt completely safe of us being outside because, one, they could hear us, two, they could see us, and it was such a safe neighbourhood, unlike things are right now. My father stepped out. Now, my father was always into the skies, ufology, and I grew up around that, so that was fantastic for me. But I've had a very long life of paranormal activity too. So anyway, he steps out and he's like, wow, the sky looks fantastic tonight. But we couldn't really see the comet from where we were because there was a street light outside the house causing too much light pollution. So my father suggested that we walked a little down the road, and there's kind of like this pathway on the opposite side that kind of runs between what was an old school and a railway track. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. It's exciting, right? So he went in, he grabbed his telescope, and off we went. So walks down this path, and you get to the very end of it, and bearing in mind there's no street lights, there's no light or anything on this path. Literally at that point we just had whatever kind of light from the sky there was from the moon and so on. So we're all a little ooh, and we get to the end of this path. There's like a grass clearing, and just beyond this little bit of grass patch is a football field. I say football, I think you guys recognize it as soccer in the US. Now, it wasn't like a big stadium or anything fancy like that. It was a field, and it had some markings that were sprayed with the white paint, and it had metal white bars going all the way around the field that creates like a barrier, a fence. And to one side you had like a box for people to sit, which was fairly small because it's only a small local football field for like local teams, small teams that want to play against each other. So we arrived there and my dad's like, great spot to set up the telescope. We've got no light pollution. Let's check out this comet. Now I was so excited about this. I had brought my binoculars, which I had around my neck. And so my father setting it up, my sister stood there, my friend stood there talking to my dad. And I decided, and I don't know why this happens to me, I always get this intuitional little kick in my mind that nudges me and says, go do this. It's not like I hear the words, go do this, but it is like a nudge, like I immediately just go and do it. But it's like, I don't know why, right? I'm just doing it. So I walk about 8-9 feet away from them where they were setting up, and I'm just staring at this football field because suddenly this black figure stood in the middle, is facing me and just watching me. And I'm like, okay. So logically, in my mind, no matter how young I was, I've always had that kind of logical sense, right? Where's the dog? Because I'm thinking at this point, it has to be a dog walker, right? They're out walking a dog this late in this area. Confused by this, I'm just continually staring at this figure and I'm still trying to work it out in my mind. And it's like one of those moments that feels very surreal because I couldn't make out any details on this figure whatsoever. You couldn't see any kind of distinguished shapes. It was literally just the shape of a human figure, or at least I thought it was human. At that point, I hadn't said anything to anybody behind me because I was still absorbing and taking it all in. This felt like a lifetime, but it didn't last very long. And so I lifted the binoculars up from my chest, and I swear I hadn't taken my eyes off this figure. So I was literally like this, as quick as that. But the moment those binoculars are gone from about here, or wherever I start to lose sight, to here, in that split second, it had gone. Now, again, in confusion, I'm stood there like, looking around and I can't see anything. Like, where's this figure gone? It was right in the middle of the field. It's impossible for anybody, if it was human or animal or whatever, to literally run away. You would have seen something, but I didn't see anything. Completely freaked by this. I was just like, shit, what have I just seen? So I turn around, I calmly walk back to the others, and I know my little sister is sensitive to this kind of thing, so I didn't want to scare her. So I said to my dad, so I leaned in and I said, Dad, I just saw something over there staring at us. So my dad said, okay. And my sister, hearing this, started to panic. I thought, oh no. And she's like, oh no, Dad, I don't want to stay. Please, let's go. It's scary. I don't want to stay here. It's freaking me out, blah, blah, blah. So I felt bad because we were all excited to see this comet. But then we started to walk back. And I got back to the house. I went straight inside the house. I was like, Mum. She's like, hey, all right. How did it go? I said, Mum, I just saw this, and I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and I just started drawing this image that I saw, and she showed it to her and she went, wow. Now, there's a link to my mum with the shadow figures that has some significance here. But the earliest experience I had of shadow figures, I was 8 years old. I had gone to stay at my grandparents' house. I had to stay in my grandparents' living room. We all slept in the same room, and no, it wasn't because that was a normal thing to do. It was simply because my grandmother had an accident when she was just a child and was hit by a car while she was crossing the road. The accident was that bad that she was in and out of hospital for 8 years. Because of this accident and the way it affected her body, being as old as she was, when I was a child, she was like 70 something. She was very short in height because of the accident, and she kind of walked leaned over a little. So she couldn't get up the stairs and had to have a special bed in the living room. My grandfather, being the gentleman that he was, never went upstairs to his own bed and always slept downstairs on the sofa to accompany my grandmother. So what they used to do for me was they used to push 2 big armchairs together to create a bed for me, and it felt real cozy. So on that night, we are in the living room. My grandmother's to the left of me and my grandfather's to the right of me on the sofa, and I'm at the very back of the room with the 2 armchairs pushed together. I had fallen asleep whilst they had the TV and the light on and gentle chatter. That always felt safe to me because I couldn't sleep without a light on when I was a child for all the paranormal stuff I used to experience. I awoke a few hours later to see that the light was turned off. My eyes were just trying to adjust to the room because something didn't feel right. As my eyes adjusted and I started seeing everything clearly in the living room, I notice something start to move on the wall over towards my grandmother. As I'm looking closely, I'm starting to see more shapes. These things look like big shadows walking and moving around the walls. At this point, and I got hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I'm telling this. At this point I freaked out. I called out to my grandparents, please turn the light on, I'm seeing something. They're like, it's okay, there's nothing here, don't worry, you're safe, it's okay, go back to sleep, we'll leave the light on. So from this I felt comforted. They're now awake, the light is on, I feel okay, can't see the shadows anymore now the light is on. I go back to sleep, wake up again and see the same thing. Now in my mind, logically, like I said, I've always been logical, I was thinking maybe a car could have been passing by outside and the light projecting from the headlights could have hit objects and therefore reflected shadows as it was moving past the house. However, on the street that they lived, the road outside was quite narrow and close to the house, so you would hear any traffic, especially how silent it was at that time of night. But I promise there were no cars, and if their headlights went past, you would see it glow up on the curtains and the wall, etc. So again, I asked for the light to be turned on. After a short time, fell back asleep again. After that night, I never stayed there again. I also know that after that occasion, lots of weird things went on in that house. The links with all these shadow figures are absolutely insane, but it doesn't end there. And just to let you know, whilst writing all this out for this video so that I didn't forget anything to share with you, some weird things happened. I'm sat here at this desk and I'm facing this way and my computer right in front of me. Where you are currently resting on a table next to the desk. My TV remote was on this table. I'm working away here, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, the TV, which is just behind the computer, sitting on the desk, turns on by itself. Yeah. I look round, I see the remote on the table, and I was kind of just sat there for a moment like, okay, that happened. Now I realised that, one, electronics do goofy things. They can go on by themselves, a button can get stuck on the remote, anything could happen. But it just so happened that as I was writing about the shadow figures and my whole story, so I didn't forget any information, the TV turns on by itself. Coincidence? I'm kind of leaning towards not a coincidence, but you have your own opinion and I'll respect it. Now, my mother saw shadow figures when she was a child too. She was staying in a caravan with her family, and a caravan here, I don't know what it's like over where you are, wherever you're watching this from, but it was kind of like a small mobile home that you tow on the back of your car. And sometimes there's parks where they have these things there that you can rent them out and stay in them for a holiday near the beach or something. So my mother and her family went to stay in one. In this small caravan there was a room that she slept in. It was late at night, the curtains were closed. She heard this noise. She looked to the window and she saw what looked like figures moving all the way around the caravan. Being freaked out, she was too afraid to open the curtains to see who was there. Now I gotta admit, in her shoes I would feel exactly the same way, but it's interesting to me to know that my family has experienced these things as well as myself. Now you could argue that if she had told me about this, it was planted in my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people would believe that I was seeing these things just because of my family's experiences. Maybe that's the case, I don't know, but whatever I see is real in my experience. But one thing's for sure, I will keep you guys updated with any more activity that happens here, because the other recent thing that happened that completely spooked us out is I was sat with my mother in our living room downstairs. My partner was in the kitchen washing up. We had this brief conversation going on between my mother and I, and suddenly we heard a knock, boom, 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 really loud on the front door. Now from the kitchen you can see through kitchen door straight through into the hallway downstairs and the front door. The front door has glass panes so you can see if there's anybody in front of the door. It is slightly frosted and it has some detail on it like flowers and stuff like that, so you can't completely see every detail, but you can definitely make out when somebody's there. So I was like, did you hear that? Now this is the crazy thing. My mum's two dogs were there, and whenever there's a noise or a bang or knocking, they go crazy because they run to the door and think that somebody's trying to come into the house. However, they didn't respond to the knocking, and when the knocking occurred, I paused, my mother paused, we looked at each other. I said, did you hear the bang? She said, yeah. So I called out to my partner and said, did you hear it? And they said, there's nobody at the door. I said, but it sounded like it came from the front door. It was specific, like on the glass, bang, bang, bang. She said, no. And where we were in the living room, you could hear the door behind the living room wall. You get used curious to where the sounds come from and the direction of those sounds, right? So it was very, very odd. The whole thing was so bizarre, but everybody heard it, but there was nobody there. I have so many of these stories of stuff that's happened in this house from the past, and I'll be happy to share them with you if you're interested in that. So let me know, leave me a comment, and I will go into depth with more of these stories. I will keep you informed. Going back to the comet, that comet was in 1996. I did some digging on the information about that comet. Now, supposedly there was an object seen trailing that comet that people thought was a UFO. Supposedly this UFO was seen on a special telescope, and that's how they saw the object, kind of like an elongated craft. People were starting to hear about this and get a little freaked out and also curious. Supposedly a court caught wind of this story. Hearing about it, they decided that they were going to take their own and have a mass. I don't need to say the words, I can't, YouTube won't allow it. But that's what happened. They called the whole incident the Heaven's Gate. It was all because they thought that if they took it, they would be transported onto this craft that was following the comet. They believed it was like a gateway for them. They weren't the only ones caught up in this. In that year, in 1996, we had in the UK more UFO sightings and reports than any years previously to that point. Other years were receiving like 200 cases, but in 1996 there was over 600. Now, there was debate about this because that year the X-Files was released. People went crazy over it. So skeptics were saying that it's probably simply because X-Files was promoting all that type of stuff, and that people were looking to the skies more and claiming they were seeing things they weren't really UFOs. However, is this the case? Was the comet a catalyst for change? In ancient China, emperors would actually employ observers to watch the sky for comets. They had a book where they documented comets from 202 BC right through to 9 AD. I know, mind-blowing, right? The book was called Divination by Astrological and Meteorological Phenomenon. I have to remember that one, that's a long title. So they would document every comment in that book. They had illustration, and they also had like a caption part underneath. And under various comments, it would say something like when there was a drought, or coming of a plague, or death of a prince, things like that. Now, I've got this information off a website. Europe had their own mixed beliefs too. Some saw them as good signs, other people saw them as omens. So I do find all of this crazy fascinating, that at the time of the comet I see that black figure, and that was a year when we had a mass amount of UFO sightings. Do these comments bring about change, or warn us, or do something? Maybe there's an energy thing at that point. There's a lot of stuff going around right now about simulation, and I just want to touch on that. Just recently I've been looking into things like manifestation and transforming the mind. I'm a believer in our own ability and the power to change things and transform things in our life. I believe we all have that power, no matter where it comes from. So with all this, I'm no stranger to manifestation, and back in the past I would watch things like The Secret, the documentary that was on TV. By the way, they left a lot of important stuff out in that of how to do things, and I think that was just a selling point so that they could tie you into following the teachers on there and buying into their courses, yada yada. They gotta make a living, right? It came to me recently to really dig into it all again, and I came across Neville Goddard. Now, he's been around for a long time, and he was teaching and doing lectures back in the 60s, etc. This man blew me away so much and opened my mind so much to the idea of life being like a simulation. Now, to many people that idea is laughable straight away, because we're already programmed with an idea of simulation from movies like The Matrix, Elon Musk thinking that we're in some sort of video game and being controlled from an outside source. Sure, all these things are possible, I guess. But in terms of a simulation, in the sense of, even if you touched on religion, that teaches us that we are soul living in a human form. So we've come from wherever, we're born into this human form, we learn things here on earth in our school, and then we go back to heaven or hell should we die. So in a sense, yes, if we are a soul and energy coming into human form, that would kind of give the whole idea that yes, this is sort of like a simulation, and we will eventually leave this because that's the natural order of things and return to where supposedly we may have come from or not come from, and to a whole new place that's either very cool or very bad. So when you look at it like that, and he talks about how to feel God's presence within you simply with your imagination, it blew my mind. It gave me a whole new perspective to everything. So I've been looking into Neville Goddard's stuff, his lectures, his books, everything that you can think of, and see what it's all about. So if you want to follow me and my progress with that and sharing his content with everybody, check out my second channel, Angel Mia Imagine. There's going to be some very cool stuff on there, and I'm very excited for its future because I want to share with you how much I'm manifesting, and I didn't realize just how much I had been manifesting in my life, and it's very freaking cool, and I'm still doing it now. It's small things in the moment, but eventually it will become bigger things the more in touch I get with myself on this, and the more I can use my imagination to assist. So anyway, that brings us up to date, and I hope you find this video a little entertaining at least, and follow me for more cool content about various subjects and stuff going on in my life and how I'm progressing in various things, and I will keep you informed. There may be some cool stuff that you like. If you are a new YouTuber and you want to check out some tips, check out my most recent videos. I've been doing lots of tips and progress on my performance on YouTube and how I'm progressing in the most honest and straightforward way possible. On that note, I'm going to love you and leave you and say thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves. Have a good day, night. Keep it bright. Lots of love. Angel Mia.